So, gluten or not? If you ask me, I'd rather stick to fish and wine. But today we'll talk about gluten and what is it in gluten that makes it such of an issue for many people nowadays, and why it is recommended for many people with ASD to avoid gluten, why sometimes gluten-free can be more harmful than gluten. Maybe it is not gluten or not only gluten that is guilty. And if you can't live without it, I'll share tips how to make it less of an issue. Nowadays, more and more people seem to be intolerant to gluten, and I'm not even talking about people with celiac disease. So what is it in gluten that makes it so frightening? Gluten is actually made up of many different proteins, but the main two ones are gliadin and glutenin. They actually bind together and support dough, allowing the bread to be light and fluffy. Also, other things these two proteins have in common is that they can trigger an autoimmune reaction in people with celiac disease. Modern wheat variety contains slightly less protein than the old ones, but the gluten content of the variety has remained roughly constant over the decades. However, the composition of gluten has changed. The proportions of gliadins decreased significantly while the glutenin content increased. So what has changed in the past 50 years that causes sudden increase in gluten intolerance? Everything. The way we mill it, the way we grow it, the way we eat it. Before the birth of processed food, we used old stones methods of milling that helped us to keep nutritional value of wheat naturally. Farming has changed. In 1780s, crop yields in EU doubled due to much higher use of fertilizers, chemicals and pesticides. Do you think it's a coincidence that during the same period we see the dramatic rise in food intolerances and diet-related conditions? And the amount of cereals we eat has increased dramatically. Gluten is in every processed food, in sausages, in fast food, in desserts, sauces, etc. Many parents of children with ASD report improvements in behavior and progress in development after introducing gluten-free diet for their kids. It is recommended by many nutritionists and doctors to introduce gluten-free diet for children with ASD, even if the test didn't show gluten intolerance. One of the reasons is the issue with gut permeability and IBS in majority of children with ASD. If gluten peptides are absorbed in the bloodstream, they cause systemic effects upon the immune system. It has been well researched that such gut irritation then activates immune cells in the brain microglia that initiate immunoexcitotoxicity when the brain is damaged by excitotoxins. And an interesting fact is that gluten peptides exhibit opioid-like activity. Therefore, they can cause euphoria and addiction. So brain fog, hyperactivity, causeless laughter, self-stimulation, etc. can be an effect of that. Sometimes gluten-free product can be more dangerous, harmful for your health than gluten. And the first recommendation is to read the label when you buy gluten-free product, because the amount of chemicals, preservatives and what they substitute gluten with can be way more harmful and dangerous for your health than gluten itself. The irony is that most gluten-free versions of traditional wheat-based foods are actually junk food. So again, advice is to check ingredients. In our case, when my son was recovering from severe gut infection, the thing that damaged his gut most of all were oats, not wheat. So our favorite porridge contained prolamine protein avenin, a cousin to gliadin, similar in structure but not identical. So whether or not labeled gluten-free or wheat-free, all oats contain avenin, so technically all oats contain gluten. And in Australia or New Zealand, it is even not allowed to label gluten-free for oats. So when I started to dig into that subject more, I figured out that it's not only gluten that is an enemy. Gluten is just most researched, best known, and the most dangerous example of a prolamine. Prolamines are toxic lectins that are abundant in grains, legumes, pseudograins. In the seed of the plant include wheat, oats, barley, quinoa, rice, peanut, and soy. They function as storage proteins in plants, and they are part of the seed natural defense mechanisms. So, as you can see, diet-related issues are much more complex than just removing gluten from your diet. If you suspect that gluten might be an issue but you do not have time or possibility to introduce gluten-free diet, one of the ways to get around it is fermentation. In one study, a 4-hour ferment managed to break down 80% of the gliadin that would be broken down in 8 hours. Another study found that under certain conditions a sourdough culture could break down the gliadin proteins enough that they would not be toxic for those with celiac disease. Also, fermentation and sprouting can significantly decrease the lectins in the grains. And another way around it is to use an enzymatic strategy, which means to eat enzymes with your meal. Gluten-free diet is not the cure for every single disease in the world, but generally it is recommended to consume less gluten. And if you have decided to try a gluten-free diet for you or your child, it is recommended to stick to it at least half a year to see any benefits.